Redditors who were raised in cults, when was the first time you realized something was wrong? I was raised in a very strict manner by Church of Christ parents in an extremely legalistic Southern Baptist church. I was extremely sheltered, allowed only one movie, maybe, and 1 hour of TV a week, only Christian movies, books, TV shows, radio, etc. I never interacted with kids outside of the church bubble, as my parents started a Christian school so that I wouldn't have to go to the evil public school and be brainwashed. For me it was when my pastor and my youth pastor took me aside during a church camp and said they were worried about my salvation as I hadn't led anyone in the sinner's prayer and didn't go on visitation, which was door knocking on Sunday afternoons to talk about Jesus. Instead, I played harp as part of the instrumental group every Sunday and Wednesday and sang in the choir when I wasn't playing, which practiced during the same time as visitation. They basically told me that since I showed most of the other fruits of the spirit like love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, etc., they thought I was Christian, but since I openly boycotted visitation and hadn't borne any of the bringing new sheep into the flock fruit by leading anyone in the sinners I was 15. I never interacted with non-Christians and was part of the instrumental group and choir which practiced during visitation. How could I do that if everyone I knew was already Christian? It led to some serious questions. But I couldn't really do anything until I escaped to college 3 years later. Terrifying what parents put their kids through. Glad you got out. When it came time for me to leave for my own mental health, I became the villain, and when confiding in my college tutor she was horrified to learn even a fraction of what I had grown up with. She was the main encouragement I needed to get through when I did. Dang, that tutor seems like a good person. Helping encourage someone to get out of a cultish place is hard. Ex-Jehovah's Witness here. My first hint that something was wrong was the amount of control exerted in our day-to-day lives. No beards, no long hair for men, no tattoos or piercings, no shirts with edgy artwork like band shirts or shirts with skulls, no entertainment they don't approve of, etc. Other witnesses are trained to report you to the elders if you're not following their guidelines. Such as if you have a position of respect in the congregation but someone sees that you have a rated R movie, they'll report you to the elders and you could lose your position and good standing, which will change the way the congregation treats you. What really tipped it over the edge for me though was their doctrine that all non-witnesses deserve to die at Armageddon by God's hand, simply for not being witnesses. Armageddon is supposed to be urgently imminent, and over 99.9% of the world will die just because they are not witnesses. That didn't sit right with me. I had been working in retail for some time, and the people I worked with were every bit as intelligent, compassionate and loving as any witness I knew. Eventually, these issues became too great for me to bear, and I committed the ultimate sin, researching information that criticizes the religion. We were taught to be terrified of anything that remotely criticizes the religion and its leaders. I finally pushed against that fear and did the research. Woke up instantly. Realized why they taught us to fear apostate information so much. It's because they know it's all true and they don't want us to see it. I was born and raised into a not so known Buddhist cult, although whether it's a cult or not is contested by a lot of people. Still, called SGI. My mum was practicing it when she was still pregos with me, thus I was considered to be a fortune baby as they say LMAO. I didn't think too much about it as a kid. We went to our meetings every week and met people, but at some point I learned the religion had a whole political thing going on in Japan and I was so confused. Also, I've had extensive mental health issues, and over the last couple of years I realized my mum, who has been practicing this religion for 20 plus years, is still a narcissist who has never shown an inch of wisdom or any kind of forgiveness as our religious text said. I've slowly moved myself away, but it's hard because anywhere I move to my mum will always try to get me connected to a local member, and it's a lot. Thanks for sharing. It's interesting to hear about non-American and non-Christian cults as well. Glad to hear you've managed to free yourself. When I was 5 and the leader, who claimed to receive messages directly from God, accused me of doing something I knew I had not done. When the elders told me that I could no longer speak to my younger sister anymore because she was in bad standing with the organization. She's the only family I have left. They made her out to be this monster just because she wasn't actively going to church. That's when the glass shattered for me. Update. Thank you so much for the awards and the wholesome support. To answer, I was one of Jehovah's Witnesses and my sister and I are still close. She's doing great things for herself and I do not regret my decision at all. Don't let someone else make decisions for your life. You'll be much happier. I can tell by the words you use that we grew up in the same cult. After watching The Day After in the 80s, I asked my mom if we knew the nukes were coming. Who would she rather spend her last moments with, me or the cult leader? She chose him. I came up with my own survival plan after that. I was going to skateboard to safety. Skateboarding your way out of a nuclear apocalypse. That's radical, dude. Former Jehovah's Witness 2. The first time I realized something was wrong was when a huge core belief changed in 1995. The end will come before the generation that saw the events of 1914 died. Changed too. Well, it's changed 7 times since then. I was confused and it didn't compute that my entire life's beliefs changed overnight. I struggled on a while until shortly after my then husband beat the crap out of me and for some reason he called the elders over to help and the elders told me be a better wife so he doesn't get angry. I was done then. Done. If that's the best that God has to offer, then frick off. I was 12 years old and my classmate from school died in a car accident. We were as close of friends as I was allowed to be with someone who wasn't in the cult. I asked my mom if I would see my friend in paradise afterlife and she said no because her parents weren't Jehovah's Witnesses. Then and now, I couldn't believe that an innocent 12-year-old wouldn't get a shot at everlasting life because of her parents. It was definitely the biggest crack in my ideology that only grew as I got into my teen years. Not in a cult per se, but was in one of those evangelical mega churches. Started as a nice corner church, the party was genuine. I don't think that the pastor planned the whole thing. He seemed a genuine preacher until the church grew exponentially. Like went from a few hundred members to 15,000 in less than 2 years. Then his main focus was entertaining the masses, which drove him to do stupid things. Many weird things started happening. Especially, one day he had a revelation that the congregation needs to expand further and members have to, I am serious, give out all the gold they were wearing. I know a lady that got into serious trouble with her husband because she gave away her gold wedding band. My last straw was when he promoted himself to apostle and renamed himself Paul. Apostle Paul. Okay. When I learned that, if a woman was going to be raped, it would be better for her to kill herself than risk having her blood lineage tainted. When my other friends came to my church for the first time, most of my friendships were isolated to church members until middle school. I started going with my other Christian friends to their churches which were all similar to each other. When they came to mine they were uncomfortable and they all started telling me my church was weird. Around 13 years old a friend's mother asked me a few questions about my church and I had recently gotten the internet so I started asking questions at my church, and the questions were not welcome. My church was an offshoot, home-based, from what is known as the Way Ministries. Recently a co-worker told me a long story about almost getting indoctrinated to a cult while he was in college. I mentioned how it sounded like the Way and his eyes lit up. When my brother started asking, politely, how our religion was founded and how our family got involved and generally just questions about life. They don't believe in evolution or kissing before marriage, and they would bite his head off about it at age 11. It made me realize they were being defensive because they had no answers. If you can't explain why you're in a religion, you get the frick out. Okay, so I wasn't raised into a cult, but from age 5-8 I lived with my mom, her third husband, and her parents who were all a part of a 100+ member sex group in the late 90s early 2000s. It was a lot like a cult though. They had to sign waivers to join, recruited, and had recruitment expectations, wore specific outfits, encouraged family members to join, encouraged not having friends outside the group as it endangered their lifestyles. Anyway, I first knew something was wrong when mom brought me on a yacht and when it started pouring rain she forbid me to enter the lower deck to escape the rain. I was like 6 and they couldn't stop the UHH meeting going on so I could stay dry. Of the people who were at the home and who I met during meetings, 6 of them within the last 20 years have served time for sex crimes, and every time one of them was arrested they had meetings about it to help destroy computers and stuff. I'm not sure if it fits the exact def of a cult though. Definitely sounds like a cult to me. I use the BITE model, which measures behavior control, information control, thought control and emotion control. I was a Jehovah's Witness. My parents made the mistake of letting me watch science documentaries. I told my parents I wanted to be a paleontologist when I grew up and they looked at me funny and told me I couldn't because those people believed in evolution. I was 4 at the time. I reluctantly tolerated no days and holidays. The two things that really broke it as a kid was 1. The blood card. I was handed a blood card when I was 7 that says if I ever needed blood that I will not accept it in case of an accident. This was for medical personnel to find if my parents weren't around to tell them. I had it signed and in my wallet for one day. I got terrified of dying because of a card so I ripped it up and threw it away. 2. Door-to-door ministry. I have been traumatized by guns drawn on me, screamed at by strangers, fellow congregants being attacked or hurt. One even had acid poured on his face. To this day I will not knock on or ring a door if I can get away with it. I left officially when I was 18. Side note, after leaving I found out a girl who was around my age had been molested by a brother in the congregation. Caused the hall to split. Don't know what came of the incident. Exactly 1 year after I was disfellowshipped as a Jehovah's Witness. Having friends outside the cult really helped me out, and my brother also left with me too. We both do not speak to my parents anymore. It's been approx 5 years now. Apparently the Jehovah's Witness founder claimed the world would end in 1874. I got punished for my own sexual assault. I was victim blamed. The abuser was twice my age. I was mid-teens. I was forced to repent. For what? I am not sure, as they wouldn't answer that question. As I got older and looked back, I realized that everything they'd told me was a lie. If you do everything you're supposed to be blessed. If you break the rules, you have challenges, obstacles, lessons, and must repent. But if Jesus dies for my sins, why do I have to repent? And what am I repenting for? I didn't consent to any of that. Nor could I from a legal standpoint. The only obvious answer was that it was all bulls. Then years later, a widely publicized case with similar circumstances became international news, and the victim's clergy person stood up on CNN and said she was forgiven for being raped. I had no doubt years before, but when I saw that particular press conference I had to get therapy to deal with all that rage. When I was told doing independent research on the doctrine would lead to being shunned by my friends and family, that is fall in line B. Jehovah's Witness. My aunt and uncle joined the radical sect of the Seventh-day Adventists. Seventh-day Adventists don't allow dancing, cards, chess, checkers and most board games. They can't go to plays or partake in anything that isn't harmless, but it isn't clear what is holy and what is profane. That means that sports and even watching TV are really unacceptable unless somehow religiously aligned. My cousins were fascinating. Their parents joined the global mission arm and became missionaries, professional, and lived in Argentina, Thailand and Africa. My cousins would come to North America every so often to see family, but were so bizarre because they had no cultural references. They were raised in a cloistered community with little to no outside influence, so they didn't know music, arts, or pop culture. They had never heard most music or even seen a Gilbert and Sullivan play. They would come to us and talk about the church, but there was no way me or my other cousins would give up our lives to live in some quasi-monastic world. Their parents abandoned the church after a number of years and became mainliners. But for a good 7 years, my cousins were like people who had been unfrozen from a glacier and trying to navigate life as interlopers. When my youth group leader said that telling poor people about Jesus was more important than feeding them or housing them, I drove to the outskirts of town to teach these two kids violin once a week. I knew they were on the weirder side of the homeschooling spectrum, but I had no idea how deep it ran. They never left the house unless it was for church or to the youth orchestra practice. They didn't have friends outside of their cousins. They lived in a huge house. Dad was a cop and mom was, I think, I don't know where they got the money from. These kids never had an emotion in their lives, and no opinions. I knew it was probably a cult when they literally had no opinions on anything beyond a favorite color. Like we'd listen to two pieces and I said which would you rather learn and they literally didn't care. They liked both just fine. Couldn't describe musical pieces with emotions. Just facts like fast or loud. The church they went to was outside city limits. It didn't have a website or contact info, so I have no idea what denomination it was. I was reprimanded for playing them the Beatles when talking about general music appreciation, chord progressions, etc. Stuff every music student should know. We don't listen to music other than classical and Christian. I should have played them things from operas like Salome or explained the backstory of Symphony Fantastique if they were going to preach the wholesomeness of classical music. But I didn't. The oldest kid graduated and has no plans to go to college even though she talked about it. No idea what they're doing now. I know I couldn't undo years of whatever brainwashing they'd undergone, but before I moved and couldn't teach them anymore. I really tried to instill passion in music and having opinions. Finally I got one of the kids to tell me they'd rather play a fast song than a slow song. God, I hope they're doing okay. This is somehow the saddest one here. To play music and feel nothing. It's wrong. When I met with my mother about difficulty coping with my arranged marriage, I explained to her the abusive aspects of the relationship and how much it was breaking me down, and her response was that it was my job to be quiet and if God wanted to change my husband, he would. I suddenly realized, sitting across from her and looking her in the eyes, that she had let my father take my childhood innocence and had zero qualms about my mistreatment now at the hands of my husband. I knew when I hugged her goodbye and cried all the way home that I would never see her again. It's been 4 years since I ran away. Recently, I'm 41 years old and kind of had the blindfold pulled that a lot of the evangelical organizations I've worked with in my life have been cults. In my teens we went to a church that told you who you could hang out with, what you could watch on TV, what movies you could see, and picked who within the church you could be friends with. 99% of the leaders told you how to run your family but had kids who were either teenage pregnancies or a baby daddy, illiterate homeschoolers, high school dropouts or drug addicts. There were stretches where we went to church 2 times a day, even during the week. They encouraged people to get their kids out of school for revival meetings. Homeschoolers postponed their classes. It was consuming. They started arranged marriages, with several families petitioning my parents for me to marry their daughters. They almost went for it but stopped because it seemed weird. As I moved off to college they recommended a mega church they got a lot of their messages and such from. This church did more of the same. They encouraged high school seniors to put off college a year and pay the church $3,000 for an opportunity to work there for a year for an internship program that guaranteed ministry work experience. This program micromanaged your life to the hour, included intense hazing for new members that routinely sent students to the hospital and stacked them all into student housing so that you could focus more on the program. Our A teacher was off sick and the substitute teacher told us the same Bible story from the week before but with a completely different ending. When my mother ignored my molestation by a member because they were a member, and they would never do anything like that, and even if they did it, they were a member. When I was passing the mic down the aisle at the Watchtower study and the elder at the row seat started rubbing my thigh and trying to go higher. When I moved away he held my leg there and gave me a stare like don't you move boy. So many red flags. Speaking in tongues. Hellfire nonsense. I felt like the only sane person in the room. Saying Pokemon came from Satan. This is when I stopped believing. No non-Christian media, which became a big fight with my parents. Caused a lot of resentment. The church did regular book burnings. This was traumatizing. As a nerdy kid who loves to read, this made me hate them. Saying it was bad to research other religions or what they teach. 6k-year-old Earth etc. I realized they had something to hide. Thank frick my mom is a hypocrite and had 2 other kids out of wedlock and was excommunicated. I was raised with the belief that if I followed all the rules and was a good person, I'd feel a confirmation of everything. 7-year-old me was well aware that I had yet to feel it, and that was one of the many things that led to becoming depressed at the age of 12. I kept having questions that I had no answer for other than God works in mysterious ways. Eventually, I found a YouTube channel where the person told about how they left the religion, and I realized my whole life was a lie and that I no longer had to try and believe in something that never worked for me. When I read a bedtime story about a little boy who was hit by a car and in the hospital, the boy in the room with him asked if he was Christian. The injured boy says no. The other boy tells him he won't go to heaven unless he's a Christian. So he advises the injured boy to keep his right hand raised to show Jesus that he wanted to be a Christian. The injured boy died during the night, but his right arm was propped up by a pillow, and Jesus understood and led him into heaven. When we were told that we couldn't go to college, I was about 15 when I realized that we weren't allowed to. The elders said it was because of the end time coming and wasting time, and worry about fellowship in the world. It is because they want to keep us stupid. That was the year I left. That was compounded because the same year my cousin tried to kill herself, and they told us not to visit. I hadn't been baptized yet. You wait until you are old enough to study and consent. So I told the elders that if we weren't allowed to talk to her in her greatest time of need, they could shove it. Warning: anti-Semitism and white supremacy. When I was a teenager, my parents divorced, and my mom and grandparents became involved in what was basically the religious arm of the white supremacy sovereign citizen militia movements. The Venn diagram overlap is close to a perfect circle. Their philosophy encompassed everything: religion, politics, healthcare, education, even, believe it or not, weather. My grandfather believed the Russians were trying to control the weather, so there was nothing that wasn't colored by that worldview. One of the defining principles of what I now call a cult is that Jewish people are evil and Aryans are God's chosen people. Don't ask, and my apologies. I started to seriously question it when we went to a home meeting and one of the elders was going on at length about how Italy was corrupted and that Sicily is overrun with Jews. Now, what he didn't know but my grandparents and mom did was that my dad's family immigrated from Sicily at the turn of the century. I had just started to think, hey, wait a minute. When my grandfather shut the guy up and changed the subject, I spent the rest of the meeting thinking, if it turned out I had Jewish ancestors, would they disown me, and how can they hold a person responsible for their ancestry? And that was it. I kept it quiet for a year until I could leave home, and never looked back. My siblings weren't so fortunate. The adults started homeschooling them as soon as I left. I was the oldest, and they knew I'd kick at being pulled out of school senior year, and spend more years in the cult until they could leave home themselves. None of them still believe what we were taught, thank goodness, but they're all still some flavor of conservative, whereas my experience turned me into a flaming liberal hippie peacenik. My entire childhood was spent in a holiness separatist cult. My dad inadvertently became the whistleblower and the cult imploded as I was going into 7th grade. I knew we were different, as I wasn't allowed to participate in holiday plays or crafts in the classroom, and I wasn't really allowed to have toys per se. But once we emerged out of it into the real world, I saw what I'd been missing out on. As a kid, I didn't really know how to self-regulate without the heavy-handed structure, so once I got into middle school I really floundered academically and otherwise. It takes a long time to learn the life skills that get thwarted or interrupted in childhood. Nothing is wrong. Our supreme leader knows all and loves us all equally. Sure, he only has sex with the cute teenage girls, but that is his right and responsibility as the one true representative of God. May his seed be strong and plentiful. When they kept telling me that only men could be leaders, and women were supposed to be silent, demure, secondary, and subservient, I looked around and saw so many dumbasses I wouldn't trust to lead me out of a burning building without copping a feel and claiming it was something I did that caused them to stumble, such as wear a tank top or pants. Well, where to start? There were always so many things I couldn't grasp about what I was taught growing up. How was the world supposed to be so young? How did they fit so many animals on such a small boat? How come this faith stuff never seemed to really work? Why didn't I have autonomy over my own decisions? How come my parents and the head minister didn't appear to have to follow some of the rules that I did? How was everyone so sure that this was the correct theology to be so invested into? I think the exact moments that really did it for me was when my abusive father-in-law to be as well as my abusive grandfather were both using their book to justify their abusive and manipulative behavior. And then the time my grandfather prophesied that I used my brain too much and needed to shut it off. Those were the catalysts I needed to abandon ship completely and seek actual truth rather than just believe and trust whatever their book said without answers or proper, convincing evidence and proof. I could not be more happy to finally be out of that terrible time and place. Raised in a cult an island known as Dippers, Coonyites. It was absolutely crazy and my family are all members and had to disown me and shun me when I came out as gay. The other members within the family discussed it and decided it was necessary to strip me of any inheritance and any relationship with my family and other members of our religion. Probably when I was fairly young, maybe 6-8 years old, we'd wake up early on Sundays and bow to a picture of the founder. I was pretty sure my outside friends never had to do that, but since most of my friends were inside the church and did it too, I didn't think too much on it. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.